jumped out of the bushes after trying to grab a rest from the heat. It's almost 32 degrees now. It's absolutely baking. And this is definitely some of the hardest herping, not in terms of environment, but in terms of looking for a snake. It's really demotivating. It's really not easy. There's also not a lot of other species out here to give you those little boosts every once in a while. So, a couple more hours. Let's make it happen. Please, come on, albanica, please. We just spotted some tracks and they look pretty fresh. The snake seems to have come out the bushes here behind me, and it's come along the side of the road here. But it literally goes along there, goes up onto the road, and then bends back down into the bushes. So we're gonna give it a good bash and walk around in this area, see if we can't find it. But this is very, very positive sign. Hopefully our perseverance is gonna pay off. So here we go, guys. Here's Bitis albanica, the Albany Adder. After six and a half days of walking around in the veld, not easy to find these guys, but we were lucky enough that it's sitting here where it is a little bit more exposed, because if it's in this thicket here, no chance you're gonna see it. So we haven't even walked another 100, 200 meters, and we've just come across another track. All the signs are here that we're 100% in the right place. I've literally just walked just off the road here, so a little bit different than the first one we found. And this guy's literally sitting by this tuft of grass. And here we have albanica number 2. It's like winning the lotto twice in one night, guys. I literally can't believe it. We're gonna come back at around 6 a.m. and maybe we can find another one. The sun is literally just popping through now. Been walking around for maybe 40 minutes. I was literally on my way back to the car to start the episode with the other 2 albanica. And we found a third one. Look at him. He's sitting at the base of this bush, getting some morning sunlight, and my heart is literally pounding out my chest. This is the largest individual we found. 3 Albany Adders in the space of 24 hours. 12 hours. Sorry, I found them last night and it's the morning. Oitsa. Today we're just north of Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. I've come to this area to find one of the rarest species of snakes in Africa, if not the world. The critically endangered Albany Adder, Bitis albanica. This moment is a dream come true, and I'm truly at a loss for words. After 6 grueling days, over 150 kilometers walked, looking under countless bushes, rocks, shrubs, I managed to find not only one, not only 2, but 3 individuals. A herpetologist's dream and a true holy grail. Now, South Africa has some incredible wildlife and diversity, but up until this trip, I didn't realize that we were home to potentially one of the rarest and most endangered snakes in the world. Here are the Albany Adders. Little female, beautiful male, and another female. Very little is known about these snakes due to the lack of research done, the region they live in, and the fact that it's only been seen an estimate 20 times in the wild, making it very difficult to understand the biology and habits of this species of dwarf adder. I just want to put that into perspective. From 1937 when it was first elevated to its own species. Until 2016, there had only been 12 confirmed scientific sightings of this animal in its natural habitat. In the last few years, a few research groups have come through here, BioNerds and Endangered Wildlife Trust, and they've found a few more, bringing the number closer to around 20 odd sightings ever. Now that's pretty insane. So with these 3 being found, and the one that BioNerds found recently, that brings the number into the mid-20s, which is crazy to think that this snake has only been seen 20 times scientifically by people actually actively looking for them and not locals accidentally bumping into them and thinking it's just an ugly puff adder. So a bit of background on the genus of Bitis. Comprises of 18 species, including the larger species like your Ethiopian mountain adder, your gaboon and rhino vipers, and the famous puff adder. But 12 of the species out of the 18 Bitis are considered dwarf species. And South Africa is home to 9 of those 12, an amazing level of diversity. Each dwarf adder has evolved differently to fit and fill a niche in South Africa's diverse biomes. Horned adders are widespread around the country, around the dry parts, berg adders adapted to the mountainous areas of the country, and some species are restricted to small areas, a stretch of coastline like Schneiderei, a single habitat type like the Albany Adder, making these species very vulnerable to certain pressures such as habitat loss due to limestone mining, industrial development, habitat fragmentation, and potentially illegal collection for the pet trade. The Albany Adder, Bitis albanica, is a viper species and was previously considered a subspecies of Bitis cornuta. That's the many-horned adder, which is from the Atlantic coastline of South Africa and Namibia. The Albany Adder is named due to the habitat it's associated with, which is the Albany thicket. Until recently, several taxa were included under the name Bitis cornuta, either as synonyms or as subspecies. These included Bitis albanica, your Albany Adder, Bitis armata, your southern adder, and Bitis inornata, your plain mountain adder, which are all now recognized as full species, yet ongoing genetic studies may affect this arrangement. There's a lot of people who are keen to describe new subspecies. It's the new taxonomic thing to do, so we'll see what happens with these guys going forward. The Albany Adder has a very restricted distribution, with the extent of occurrence falling within a 95 square kilometers, which is below the critically endangered threshold, and an area of occupancy of only around 50 square kilometers. The single known surviving population constitutes of one location, and critical habitat is currently being extensively strip mined for limestone pavement. The range of Bitis albanica appears to have undergone considerable contraction, as no specimens have been collected from 2 historical areas, Dudoina in Port Elizabeth, just south of here, and Brakloof and Kleinpoorts around Grahamstown, which is just east of here. And despite direct searches in these areas, all recent records are restricted to a 10-kilometer strip, 10 kilometers, currently being mined for limestone pavement. The Kucha Bonteveld habitat is poorly protected, and more than 60% of this vegetation type falls within the PPC grass ridge mine, and may be strip mined for limestone within the next 10 to 20 years. That would mean 3 to 6 generations for this species, thus qualifying the species to be listed as critically endangered, with the threat of extinction looming in the not too distant future. And that would be a very, very sad day, to not be able to walk through this beautiful habitat and find these incredibly beautiful little adders. The Albany Adder is endemic to South Africa and restricted to inland areas of Angoa Bay in the Eastern Cape, and is probably extinct in several historical localities, which is truly unfortunate. Hopefully that can be refound. If more in-depth surveys and searches are done, they can potentially be found, because they are not easy to find, and we figured that out on this trip. An estimate population number can only be based on the incidence of occurrence and the total area of remaining habitat. The snake is extremely rare, and only 20 odd specimens have been scientifically documented in nearly 100 years in a relatively well-settled area, well known to herpetologists. And since the snake is not fossorial, meaning not living underground, it is very likely that the population numbers are very, very low. There are stories that when the mine first opened many years ago, that many of these snakes were found weekly within the mine whilst they were excavating, and some of which were actually rescued and released into adjacent areas, which would bring the number of individuals seen much higher than the current record of 20 odd, which is more the scientific record versus actually people seeing them. I'm sure a lot of locals have bumped into these guys just not knowing what it is, thus indicating that the species used to be far more abundant within its range, and its population numbers have drastically diminished in recent times due to all the pressures it's currently under. The preferred habitat of this species is marine coastal scrubland. It's found in the Bonteveld vegetation, or Kucha Bonteveld like they call it, and occurs northeast of Port Elizabeth on limestone and calcareous paleo dunes. Altitudes range from sea level up to around 400 meters in elevation, and it's in a semi-arid landscape with precipitation ranging from around 400 meters per annum inland up to around 550 millimeters per annum closer to the ocean. The mean maximum and minimum temperatures are about 32 degrees down to about 3 degrees, and frost is rare around here, with only around 3 days per year getting frost. The area receives a lot of fog and mist in the early mornings like we had this morning, as well as in the evenings, which provides the needed moisture these little species need to be able to survive, as well as the species that it shares its home with. The species is likely to be in demand in the pet trade. Although limited evidence exists to suggest that the individuals have been collected yet, no quantitative data is available for numbers removed from the wild populations. It is unknown whether the proportion of animals in the pet trade are taken from the wild or bred in captivity, but all animals in captivity would have had to be captured illegally, and I'm hoping that whatever populations are in the captive trade, if any, would be continued to be bred in captivity and not be taken from the wild. Maybe a breeding project should be implemented to help ensure the survival of this species. Hopefully BioNerds or EWT can come along and do some amazing work, which they're already doing, to be able to get these numbers up. Habitat destruction is the main threat to the species. The Kucha Bonteveld has a total area of around 24,000 hectares, and 93% of that was untransformed when the habitat was last assessed in around 2005. However, the developments of the limestone strip mining and the Kucha industrial development zone are likely to push this vegetation to near extinction. And it's likely that in 20 years' time, a maximum of only 10 to 15% of this vegetation will remain. And that's an assumption. We don't know. Maybe it speeds up. There's lots of other factors that can play. So it's really, the time is now to protect these species. Albanica are thought to be potentially extinct until 4 live specimens and 1 DOR or roadkill were found in late 2016-2017 by a conservation group called BioNerds. They conduct research and surveys on endangered species in South Africa and do some truly amazing work, so please do go check them out and support their work where you can. This is a small adder with the maximum recorded snout to vent length for males around 27 centimeters. That would be this guy over here in the middle, and then the maximum recorded length for females is 23 centimeters, which again, that's just down to the records. Females, as a rule of thumb in adders, are much bigger than males due to them having to carry the litters and carry them for 4 to 5 to 6 months at a time. So I think that the sample size is so low that it doesn't actually give a good representation of what the maximum length of males and females are. It is commonly known as the Albany Adder, Eastern Hornsman Adder, or the Eastern Many-Horned Adder, and I can see why. It's very similar to the Many-Horned Adder in many ways, as well as looking very similar to a rubida. The color and pattern is very similar to the silvery gray phase of the Many-Horned Adder. Gray coloration that matches the bedrock and the gray-brown substrates of the area like you can see them on right now. This is this limestone that you see right here. The coloration is very bold and gray with the silver color, these dark blotches, and they're surrounded by this lighter white almost outlines, which is really, really beautiful. They look quite similar actually to the red adders from the Swartberg, just possessing a little bit less color. They can vary a little bit from individual to individual, being lighter, a little bit darker, a little bit bolder, etc., etc. But as you can see, they camouflage extremely well into their environment and are extremely cryptic species. This species of dwarf adder doesn't possess any horns, like the actual many-horned or the horned adder, but have more reduced clusters of scales above each eye, around 5 to 6 to 7, depending on the individual. The Albany Adder is most active during the early hours of the morning and late afternoons, and just before sunset, which is when we found the 2 little females, and then the male in the early morning. This also depends at the temperature at that time of the year, and they'll be most active in the warmer periods of the day during the cooler months, and then in the cooler periods of the day during the hot summers. During the day, these snakes tend to hide at the base of very thick shrubs and bushes and Albany thicket, which I like to call albanica oases, which we ended up having a good few naps under during the midday heat, looking around for these guys. During winter, I would assume they go much deeper into the limestone bedrock and cracks and crevices, or even abandoned burrows to escape the cooler months or the really, really hot summer days. Again, a lot more needs to be studied about these animals to see if they're still active during the cool and cold winter months. Breeding time comes around the end of winter, beginning of spring, whereby a little male will seek out a little female that look for sheddings or scent trails, and then once they've copulated, the female will be gravid for around 5-6 months, and then they will give birth to anywhere between 5 to 8 little live young in the early summer or midsummer. Now, this species of snake will feed on mostly lizards and geckos and small rodents. I'm sure they're quite opportunistic and will take what comes their way. They ambush predators like all bitis and will wait patiently for items to come into range. Like other dwarf adders, I assume they climb up into the lower parts of the bushes and vegetation to wait for passing prey and snatch them from above. Actually, last night when we found the second little female, we straight away saw when she got disturbed, she started climbing up into the shrubbery. So that's definitely very possible. Now, venom is assumed to be very similar to other dwarf adders, which is associated with pain, swelling, and heavy bruising. But no bites have ever been recorded from this species, and the unique habitat they live in may influence the venom toxicity and composition, like in other species of snake, like our berg adders, Bitis albanica, whose venom composition changes from locality to locality, with varying symptoms from bruising and swelling to temporary loss of taste and smell. So you really don't want to get tagged by one of these guys and be the first research case. So no assumptions can be made about the venom of these guys until further studies are conducted on toxicology, etc., etc. So we'll see what comes of it. But like all bitters, when they're encountered, they tend to huff and puff and strike out, and then giving you plenty warnings to not mess with the snake. Exploitation extent of the species is uncertain. No data exists showing that the species is exploited in the wild. However, it has one or more relatives that look very similar. All your other dwarf adder species in South Africa are in the pet trade, bar this one. So it's not to say that once people know of it and realize that they can attain them, that the trade and demand for these animals would be created. So making it highly likely that it would be exploited for the same purpose in the future. And I really hope they do remain in the wild, unless captive populations can be established, which then can be released back into the wild. Remember guys, please make sure you buy your animals from reputable breeders who know what they're doing, who are breeding, who are moral breeders, moral keepers, not guys who are running out here and poaching every single snake they find and completely decimating a population. This species was listed as endangered on the IUCN in 2018, but it's not listed under CITES, meaning it can be traded. Although the species in this genus are popular in the pet trade, it is also listed in the threatened or protected species list under the National Biodiversity Management Act, whereby it may not be removed from the wild for any activity unless specifically permitted under TOPS. Lack of a database on TOPS collections hampers providing quantitative information for this assessment. It is an extremely rare species, so at present it is unlikely that it is heavily traded simply because of how few individuals have been found and the access to the land is nearly impossible. However, because of its rarity, any removals from the wild could have a significant impact on the population and could kickstart the demand for these rare species in captivity. The population is considered vulnerable when the size is less than 2,500 mature individuals, which we don't know. The number of subpopulations is less than 5, which we do know. There's only one subpopulation, or its range is under 100 square kilometers, which is true. The species is at the risk of localized extinctions, which is also true. So all of these facts the Albany Adder falls under, except knowing the population size. There is only one known subpopulation of the species, and no population size estimates are available. But with ongoing research, hopefully we can find out soon what sort of numbers are left here in the wild. The species has a very slow population growth rate, or a growth rate that varies depending on the habitat, and there's a poor chance the wild populations will recover from exploitation by poachers, who might harvest the entire extant population, removing the chance of subsequent recruitment and the chance of these guys to be saved in the wild. The habitat is highly fragmented, so the potential for recolonization and recovery of the species would be very low if they were completely exploited. So protecting the current population is of the utmost importance so that we can sustain this population and hopefully it can grow into the future. What needs to be done is draw up a biodiversity management plan for the species as a matter of urgency and conduct a population and habitat viability analysis. Conduct surveys to establish whether this adder is present in the Greater Adder Elephant National Park, while conducting research to improve knowledge of the biology of the population numbers and habitat requirements. To provide protection through local and national legislation, attempt to quantify the extent of the removal of the species from the wild for the commercial pet trade. We also need to provide formal protection of at least one locality known to harbour the populations of this species, which is the strip-mined area. This should encompass sufficient unmined Bonterfeld habitat, i.e. intact limestone pavement, to protect a sustainable population of at least 200 to 300 mature adult snakes to be able to ensure that these guys survive in the wild and there's enough genetic diversity. All in all, this has been honestly an experience of a lifetime. And with only a handful of people having seen this species in the wild, I feel truly, truly privileged to have found these snakes in the wild and get to share this amazing experience with you guys in the world. To have 3 of these amazing adders sit so peacefully and so calmly has really been fantastic. It's just unbelievable to be able to do this. And hopefully this video will shed some light on the plight of this species and we can get the protection that it deserves. Thanks for watching, guys, and remember to stand for what we stand on.